Hi class, welcome to week 7. So let's go in here because I want to talk a little bit about week 7 and a little about week 8 and your discussion board. So week 7, very straightforward, exactly what you'd expect. You're going to do a Learn Smart. You're going to look at fats, really wanting to focus on as we're prepping for our exam next week. We want to really know carbohydrate, fat, and protein, digestion, and absorption. So part of even going through the material this week, be really keeping in mind, do I understand how I process fats in my body? What are the consequences of this type of fat versus that type of fat, saturated versus unsaturated, omega-3 versus omega-6? And you also have an activity to take a look at with that. And so here you go, Chapter 6 content as you would find it. So let's actually take a look at your discussion board. So this is your second documentary, and this you only do 2 this semester, and it's called Forks Over Knives, and you have your information right here. I put it outside the weekly folder because you will work on it next week as well, and so I just thought I'd make it nice and easy for you to find. So just like before, you're going to go to Digital Campus, and you're going to get the documentary. You can also watch it at the library. Here is your discussion board. So this is an entire class discussion board versus the last one, which was just amongst your groups. And so here are some talking points that you want to consider when posting in the discussion board. Your original post is due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. this week. Next week, during week 8, you will do 2 peer responses. And so you really want to be thinking about what do you agree with, what you don't agree with, but what facts do you have to back up your agreement or disagreement. It is not good enough to say, well, my mom told me a plate should look like this. And you might giggle at that, but you wouldn't believe how many people are like, well, that's not what I was raised to believe, so that can't be true. Because as we know, we learn more and more as time goes on. And so with your original posts, really think about, have I been thorough? Have I communicated my points? Have I addressed everything here? This shouldn't just take you 5 minutes. In addition, you are coming up with a couple of research articles to point out to that support or refute anything that you're claiming. So right here, please include 2 peer-reviewed articles to support some of your ideas. And so you want to be thinking about that. Your peer responses you'll do next week. Peer responses are more subjective, and so I'd really like you to think about, have you contributed something substantial? Was your contribution meaningful? I mean, did you say, yeah, man, I totally agree? Because that's not really a discussion. And so why would you agree with someone? What points can you add to what they've asserted? And so you will need to complete that by week 8, Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Next week, we are doing protein. And so that's why we kind of have this discussion board stem over these 2 weeks, because this week we're talking about fat, which actually really affects the conversation in Forks Over Knives. And then next week we're talking about protein. I want to highlight week 8 to you real fast because right now you're also preparing for your next exam. Exam 2, chapters 5 through 8 is next week. And so there's a couple things about next week I want to point out to you, and this way it will help you manage your time pretty well, is that you have an exam. This one's 40 questions long. You'll have 45 minutes to complete it. But next week you're doing 2 chapters. Now, Chapter 7 is protein, and that content's going to look in length very similar to fat and carbohydrate. Chapter 8 is alcohol and is going to be much, much shorter. Your Learn Smart is not scheduled for very many questions. There are only 4 questions on the exam related to alcohol. Really, you want to focus on digestion and absorption. These are 2 chapters particularly you want to pay attention to these learning objectives. For example, Chapter 7, we are not going to cover malnutrition, what can be identified as protein malnutrition, because these diseases are not the result of not eating protein, they're the result of not having enough food. And so we are not going to focus on those at all. You'll have absolutely no questions on the exam. In addition, we're not really going to focus on nitrogen balance. And so as you're prepping, really take a look at these learning objectives to make sure you're studying what is necessary. I've removed as much of this content as I could from your Learn Smart. Occasionally, a couple Learn Smart questions will sneak in. I can't fix that. So let's look at alcohol. So you can see here on alcohol, learning objectives, very small. Really about what's a drink, how do we process that drink, what's our mechanism for digestion and absorption. Okay, and so you have here associated materials and a very short Learn Smart. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that, because when you see two Learn Smarts, I know many of you are thinking, oh my goodness, that is so much to study. But actually, Chapter 8 is just a little baby. So have a wonderful week. Prep yourself well. Enjoy the documentary. This one's really good. I think it'll be really informative. Some of it you're already going to get a feel of. You'll have heard a little of it and fed up. The conversation on the microbiome and live clean, eat dirty. You've also heard a little of this conversation. I will tell you, I think this documentary is slightly drier. I thought Fed Up is pretty entertaining, but it is a really good documentary. And also, you should understand that it's scientifically based, and so it's not. Particularly propaganda or anything like that. In the past, I've had questions on is it someone's opinion basically coming forward, and it's really not. So all the facts that are shown in the documentary actually can be supported through documentation. That doesn't mean that everything we learn can't be discussed further, and we learn new things all the time. So that doesn't mean everything is 100% foolproof, but I thought you should know that as well. And you are all set for week 7 and week 8. And so have a good one. Let me know if you have questions.